part of our goal here is to make sure everyone knows there is help out there. One of those resources is the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, 1-800-273-8255, 1-800-273-TALK. That number is answered locally by Every Mind, and a representative of Every Mind is joining us today. I would like to welcome our second panel, Joan Goodman, founder of the Adolescent Self-Injury Foundation, Manuel Carlo, a counselor at Montgomery County Crisis Center, Rachel Larkin, director of Crisis and Preventive Services at Every Mind. I'd like each of you to tell us a little bit about your organization and what you do in the community. Joan, I'll start with you.
Okay. I'm a licensed clinical social worker who for many, many years was in private practice treating adolescents, and always worked with depression and suicide and drug abuse, but I started to see self-injury creep into the picture in the mid-90s. And then it started to come in, and more people struggled with self-injury. And I want you to know I was at a loss for how to help someone. I was very intrigued and discovered through trial and error different ways to treat it. And because of that, I treated many hundreds of adolescents that self-injured. And so I wanted to create a nonprofit foundation to raise awareness in the world about youth self-injury. Because when someone self-injures, they feel alone, they feel crazy, and they're not crazy, but they want to find other people like themselves, so they go online, and online they get the message of doom and gloom and how to do it more and worse. So I wanted something out there that gave the message of hope and recovery, to raise awareness in the world about this problem, because it's now a worldwide crisis and public health problem. And I wanted a place for parents to get tips and suggestions, as well as young people to come and get very creative ideas of things to do instead of self-harm when they want to move away from it. And it's taken off like a rocket. So that's what I do.
Well, thank you, Jen.
Hey, I'm Manuel Calero. I'm a therapist over at the Montgomery County Crisis Center. The Crisis Center is basically a 24/7 mental health clinic. Think of it like a mental health ER. Basically, we're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We provide walk-in services where anyone can walk in anytime, any Montgomery County resident can walk in anytime, actually meet with a licensed mental health clinician and talk about any issue they might be having personally regarding a son or daughter or any other family member they might have as well. In addition to that, we man the phones also 24/7. So again, if someone wants to call about any issue they might be experiencing, any mental health crisis, or just questions about their loved ones, whether it be son or daughter, acting differently, or just anything that might be on their mind, they can always call in as well too. Sometimes we do ask that they come in person, obviously if they want something more in depth, and we can kind of have that one-on-one connection. In addition to that, we also have the mobile crisis team where we go out with police department to do mental health assessments in the community. Again, a parent can request that as well too. There's certain specific criteria for that, but we go to the houses, do mental health assessments with the police department, and determine if the person needs to be taken to the hospital on involuntary commitment. In addition to that, we work with the school department as well too. We have a partnership with the MCPS where we see, I think to this date, we've seen about maybe 1,600 kids where school counselors can make the referrals. They notify the parents or students will, as mentioned, it was mentioned earlier in the earlier panel, students might come up to a counselor and say, hey, I noticed that Johnny's been talking about suicide, or we're concerned about him. So that student can initiate contact with the counselor. The counselor can then bring in that student to the office. If the counselor deems that it's necessary for a further assessment to be done, they can notify the parents, and the parents will bring in the student to the crisis center. Again, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, free of charge. So again, if it's open anytime. So like we were talking about resources available, I think we're one of the biggest ones in the area, so definitely encourage people to take advantage of it.
And just a follow-up question. That number that you gave, is that 1,600? Is
up to so far almost 1,600.
And that's from the beginning of this school year?
Yes, and we still have, I guess, one more month of school left. Mm-hmm. So we're going to see an increase in that definitely. As the early panel was saying, with exams now and students preparing that and getting stressed out about that, finding out whether they got accepted to colleges, things like that. So we see an increase in kids expressing some suicidality or other mental health issues coming along as far as depression or anxiety. So we're probably going to see a spike in that. And that's been increasing gradually every year from what we take notes of.
Okay, definitely, thank you.
Good evening, I'm Rachel Larkin. I'm a social worker at Every Mind, and our motto is your mental wellness is our mission. I run the 24/7 Montgomery County Crisis Hotline. We are free and confidential. We will answer anyone's call, day or night. We also, because most people communicate other ways now, we answer texts as well. And we answer chat through the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and answer calls for them as well. So, we do a lot of work around suicide prevention. That's my main job. But you don't have to be suicidal to call us. You can be having a bad day. You can be overwhelmed. And about a third of our calls come from people concerned about somebody else, concerned about their child, concerned about their friend, concerned about their coworker. So we are there. We are free 24/7 for you, the community, when you need us.
Well, and let's dive in a little deeper here. And I want to ask you, what are you seeing as a practitioner in this field, the work that you provide for the community? What are you seeing? What trends are you seeing right now?
Well, nationally and locally here, suicide is an exploding issue. It's now the second leading cause of death for young adults and adolescents. It is become such a massive issue. Last month alone, we did 200 suicide chats. We are seeing younger and younger. We have seen kids 10, 11, 12 expressing suicidality, self-harming, and acute distress. So we were really seeing, and this is the busiest time of year for, I believe, all of us because of what we've been talking about earlier, but we're seeing people who need help. Mental wellness is about learning coping skills, learning problem solving, having supports around you. It's not just an illness that we have to deal with alone. It's a community and teaching and learning and helping ourselves to heal.
And then you shared some of those numbers. If you were to go a little deeper, what are some of those things that you're seeing, maybe some of those factors that young people are bringing in that contribute to their stress?
As Rachel was saying, we see kids as young as elementary school, sometimes kindergarten will come in and express behavioral, they have behavioral issues, and that will manifest into maybe some anxiety, and then later on gradually go into depression. So we see, we see kids as young as kindergarten age, 5-year-olds coming in. With all the, I guess now there's a lot more awareness now, with the school shootings and all that. I think it's been on people's radar now. So a lot of school counselors taking the initiative to refer kids. So that's a good thing, because now people are talking more about it, and I think that's kind of what we're doing here in this forum is communication, as was mentioned earlier. So we see a lot of that. We see obviously depression, anxiety, homelessness is huge here in Montgomery County as well too. So we see a lot of kids suffering through that. As the other panelists was saying earlier, we see a lot of acculturation issues. We have a big minority population here in the county, especially I guess emphasize more the Latino community. So we see a lot of acculturation issues coming in with that. People experiencing trauma, kids over there traveling here to the U.S., and then the trauma that once they arrive here, and then acculturating to this culture as well too. A lot of sometimes they don't know their parents, or they haven't met their parents in so many years because they've been isolated from them or just kind of absent from them. So we see a lot of behavioral things like that, and then depression and self-harm a lot as well.
Okay, definitely. And I know that your organization has a global presence, and just what are some of the things you're seeing as you get feedback from the people you serve?
Well, when we started the foundation, I personally had hoped we would get 100 visitors, and to date we've had over 555,000 visitors from all over the world. So people are writing in from all over the world asking for help, thanking us for saving their life. Many young people are writing in, talking about their pain and talking about the shame they feel and how they can't reach out to any adults. They can't tell their parents. So there's such a veil of secrecy that students, young people, feel that it's not okay to not be okay. It has to be hidden. I know earlier we talked about someone, one of the students mentioned we should really treat all this like we would a cold. When somebody has a cold, they say, I have a cold. But it's not done like that. It's, you know, kids might tell other kids, but often they might not feel comfortable to then reach out to an adult. And we would call these kids first finders. So anyone that is a first finder of anyone that is struggling needs to reach out to an adult. So really the message that the foundation is giving is that these problems can be treated often with professional help and with parents working hand in hand with their kids, knowing that the child will get better.
Right. And what I'm hearing also is that when we think about that veil and that need for privacy, dealing with those issues of a stigma or shame or that reluctancy to go out and get help. And I'm going to pull one of the questions that came from our studio audience. And the question is, what if a student is too afraid because of their illness to talk? And I think we touched on that a little bit, but let's think about how we can expand on that through the services that the three of you provide with your organizations. And I'll start with you.
Well, a lot of people who are afraid to say the words out loud are a lot less afraid to type them on their keyboard. And a lot of people will tell us something over chat or text that they wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable saying to an adult or their mom or dad or another friend, and that starts the ball rolling. But I think it really is important to reach out for help, and there is so much stigma around this, but more and more people are coming out and talking about, you know, Dwayne Johnson recently was talking about his bout with mental illness, and you know, if you had a broken leg, you wouldn't keep that to yourself. You'd ask for help, and we need to focus on our mental wellness just as we focus on our physical wellness, and to be brave and reach out for help because you deserve help. You don't have to suffer.
Yeah, what I've noticed with, again, we're working with the school department. You know, a lot of times students will talk to their friends, and they'll express that they were feeling, you know, maybe having some suicidal thoughts or just kind of feeling down or depressed, or maybe report some self-harm. And then that student will then go tell an adult in the school system. And then, so it kind of starts the ball going from there. So that student who's actually having or expressing those thoughts isn't actually coming out and saying it, but reported it to another friend. And then that friend is taking that information and relaying it to an adult in the school. Whether it be a teacher, whether it be a school counselor. A lot of times we get security guards also, because in a lot of schools there's security guards. And the kids feel closeness and feel a relationship with the security guards, so they can go tell an adult. So again, it's not so much the student, you know, feeling maybe ashamed or afraid to come out, but if they let one person know, that one person can then pass it on to someone else, and then that kind of starts the ball going, and then that school counselor or that adult in the school can then make a referral, notify the parents of what's going on. And sometimes it's just eye-opening for the parents to find out, hey, I didn't know my son or daughter was actually having these thoughts. And sometimes obviously it's important for them to know that what's going on. But again, it's important I think we've been talking about communication and just kind of letting one person know that's enough sometimes.
Right. And then in terms of what you're seeing, and we think about that student who is afraid to go out and talk.
And so I'd like to respond to that as a clinician. So when that ball moves forward, so they're then made to come into therapy, and often they are dragged into therapy against their wishes, and they refuse to talk in therapy, or they tell their mother, well, I'm not going to go. And so I've had parents say to me, well, how can I get my child help when they don't want help? Or how can I get them to go and see you because they don't want to? And I tell them what my philosophy is, that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But it's the job of the therapist to make the horse thirsty. So when kids would come to me and sit there and not talk, and I'm pretty good in getting kids to talk to me, but often they don't want to, I would also run group therapies where I would invite that child in. Sometimes it would take time to convince them to check it out, but they would come into a private group therapy, and these were the kids that did not stop talking. They loved it. Then they would say to me, why didn't you make me do this before? So there's all different ways, and you have to be very, very creative. And it means we're talking about communication. The school and the mental health system have to work, and parents have to work hand in hand, because we're all on the same team, for the school to know what is going on. Is that child getting help? They started to get help. Is it continuing? How's it going? And what is the follow-up?
All right. And when I think about this communication, it's so important. And that is not just what happens in the school or in the community or in someone's private household between the young person and the therapist, but there's an impact that hits the community. When I think about right here in Montgomery County, and I think about earlier in the year, we've lost, one is too many to lose, but we lost a few students. And that has an impact, not just at that school, but it just goes throughout, it ripples throughout the whole community. And so I think about the responsibility, as a former business guy, I think about business leaders and communities leaders' responsibility to help become solution providers. And so I think about how can, in your opinions, how can community leaders and business leaders contribute to really supporting youth mental wellness, as well as youth really going after or treating youth mental illness?
And I like that you're talking about youth mental wellness, because when we just focus on the word mental illness, that can just stop everyone in their tracks, because no one wants to think that's going to happen to them or in their family due to the stigma or what have you. So we need to talk about it as mental wellness. But what I would want businesses to do, I mean, we've heard today how, and we all know that more training is needed. Therapists need more training. School systems need more training in how to work with kids with these very serious problems. How do you talk to them? What do you say? What should you be focusing on, so that kids can feel comfortable to reach out, and so that we could get more therapists in the fields to be able to help these kids with these rising levels of suicide, depression, anxiety, self-injury. So I would want businesses to volunteer. I would want them to support foundations. I would want them to be able to assist us with fundraising, because trainings cost money. And in our attempt to try to save the world, we need as much help as we can get.
All right, thank you.
Definitely say there needs to be more access to resources, and as Joan was saying, definitely get more clinicians out there. There's certain home-based services here in the county, but the main thing we hear from parents is there's a waiting list, and sometimes that waiting list is 3 to 4 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks. To have an intake done or get a psychiatric appointment with a psychiatrist. So definitely more resources as far as availability for, like I said, we have certain resources that we refer to, but there's a waiting list. And so again, if there's more businesses or more people out there willing to provide these type of resources, there might be funding out there for them. And obviously the clientele is already there. I mean, there's a need for it. So definitely I'd say if people out there, any clinicians willing to do this type of work, the clientele is already there. It's just having the initiative to go out there and start these projects, because obviously people are in desperate need.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think?
I think it's twofold. I mean, what Joan said about training, sponsor a mental health first aid or youth mental health first aid for the community or your employees. But it's also awareness. So post the Be the One poster in your bathrooms, so people are reminded to ask and reach out for help for their friends. Put the Lifeline number everywhere available, so that anytime somebody's having a bad day or a crisis, they're reminded. Because you might not think about that you'll need those numbers or you need those resources until the bad day happens, and you want to have it handy. And also support the community, support constructive recreation for kids. Make sure that every kid has the opportunity to play soccer or be in the drama club or do an art or whatever they want to do, so they get a break from the constant studies and pressures in their lives.
Right. And what I think about when we look at this, I have this vision where you would have community leaders, business leaders, creating a task force that includes mental health professionals, because if we're going to really attack this epidemic that we see, we have to begin to focus on prevention. The students did a great job sharing their thoughts, And so when we began to talk about this wellness, one of the questions that we were asked from the audience was, are we talking about mental illness or mental well-being? And I look at this continuum. There's a continuum from illness to wellness. And then we would love to catch you before we begin to move lower on the illness. And so we think about strategies. What might be effective strategies that parents and students could use to help other students, and think about it also in a preventive way? John, I'll start with you.
Well, I think one way that would be very preventive is to teach families how to talk about emotions and how to talk about problems, and to have it be okay to talk about problems and struggles. And so often in families, the focus is, what are you doing? How did you do at school? What did you do at school? And so kids, and we happen to live in a very competitive environment where it's competitive times, and kids are stressed and they have tremendous academic stress, but there's not enough attention on how are they coping with all this stress. Do they talk about it at home? Do they talk about it at dinner? So I would want parents to learn how to do that, to then be able to teach their children how to be able to talk about their emotions. And maybe it starts with parents talking about their struggles and their difficult day, just to let them know that you don't have to be perfect, and nobody is, and nobody always has a great day, and there's struggles in life.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I'd recommend parents actually, come out and say and ask their son or daughter, "Have you had any thoughts to hurt yourself?" A lot of people think that if they bring up the question, then it's going to put the idea in that child. A lot of times, that child might already have the idea in their mind already. So if the parent actually came out and asked the question directly, they might get an honest answer from their son or daughter. And that might, again, start the ball going as far as conversations. Okay, let me find out more about that. How long have you had those thoughts? Have you had any plans? Have you actually done anything? A lot of times parents, it's an eye-opener for parents to realize, oh, my daughter or son has actually thought about it, actually had a plan, actually maybe did something, maybe had some self-harm, maybe did some cutting, or maybe took some pills, who knows. But again, if they actually come out and ask them, they might be shocked sometimes by the answer. They might get an honest answer from their son or daughter. So I definitely recommend just coming out and asking directly.
Now, I would tell you, as a school counselor, I've actually had that experience in the evening where a parent got in touch with me and she said, "Hey, Mr. Reed, what do I do? I just found out this." I said, "Well, let's get you directly over to the crisis center. They're 24 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I agree with you 100%. I've lived that with my students and parents. All right. What are your thoughts? Words of wisdom for our students and parents.
Words of wisdom, a lot of pressure.
You got it.
Well, I agree with what he said. Ask, and if you're afraid to ask, you can call the hotline and we'll ask with you. But I also think mental wellness needs to be taught. We learn how to eat healthy, we learn how to exercise, and we can learn how to cope and do problem-solving skills. And also, we need to remember as a community that recovery is possible and there's hope. And that, everybody goes through bad times, but there's people around you that are willing to help, that want to help you, that care, and will be there for you if you fall.
Okay. And so one of the other questions we got from the audience, it revolved around social media. Mm-hmm. All right, that word, social media, and all the thoughts go running through your head. And I know one of my students had mentioned to me, he said, "Well, not all social media is bad." I said, "You're right." Well, I hear from you guys. And the question we were asked, and it really was, what role does social media play in student self-esteem? What are your thoughts? I'll start with you, and we'll work our way back.
I've been doing a lot of talks on this recently. So social media can be incredibly positive, but recent studies show that of all the major platforms, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, they have a net negative effect. With Instagram being the worst for self-esteem, particularly girls' self-esteem. And studies have shown that if a young person spends 2 hours a day or more on social media, their risk of suicidality increases. But what brings it down is being involved in constructive activities outside of that, and taking a break from social media. So it can be positive. It can connect you with people all over the world, and it can be incredibly powerful. But there's a negative side to it, and that fear of missing out is very real. FOMO is real, particularly for this generation, and it can have a detrimental impact. It really can.
What do you think?
Yeah, what we see at work sometimes is definitely social media has had a huge impact on children's self-esteem, as far as, kids are relying on whether they get that thumbs up or that like from their friend, or a friend from another school district. I mean, it puts people together, but at the same time, it makes a lot of teens just kind of dependent on whether or not they're going to be liked by other people. And then we see a lot of spread in that within, say, the community, within the school, and then that trickles down into the outside community as well too, because now you have a friend from a friend of a friend said this about this person, and that person doesn't even know the first individual, but now that person is now affected by it. And so we see a lot of that in work, as far as a lot of kids coming in saying, this person was bullying me on social media, or cyberbullying me, and saying things bad about me or about my family, and you'll ask, do you even know this person? No, I don't, but they're in my inner circle, or they're on my list of friends, or,
Right.
and so but yeah, definitely, and kids are relying on that, and they kind of are dependent on that a lot of times, unfortunately, and we see a whole lot of that.
All right. John, what do you see?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned cyberbullying, because I think with the invention of social media, cyberbullying has just taken off. And it's terrible, and the terrible effects on young people because they feel helpless and hopeless, and they might not, as you're saying, they might not even know the person that's cyberbullying them. And it's so easy to say horrible things when you're behind a screen and just type it in. I agree with Rachel that there are some positive effects to be able to connect with people. Really, connection is the cure, but we want it to be positive connections and not negative connections.
Right.
So I think it's been damaging.
It is, and I think what's really important is, I listen to the three of you, I think about educating parents on the business side of giving kids phones and access to apps, and understanding that your kid is just a profit sign for a lot of companies, and they could care less about your kid, but they care about the kid's attention on their device, so they can increase their ability to say, this is how many kids we have, this is the marketing piece, so that you could sell ads. Just one quick plug, and when we go in, I often show my parents and students something from Anderson Cooper's Brain Hacking on 60 Minutes. It's eye-opening, and when they talk about the thousands of programmers who study neurology to look at how to create write codes that make the apps more addictive. And it's one of the other quick questions we have. What do you do about students who are genetically exposed to mental illness rather than through trauma? And I get one person to answer that, because I know I'm keeping an eye on our time. So what do you do with a student who is exposed to maybe mental illness versus genetically exposed to mental illness rather than trauma? How would you help that student? And who would like to take that question?
I'll take it.
Okay.
You don't need trauma to have depression, and we need to educate families so they can educate students that depression can run in families. Substance abuse can run in families, and that goes hand in hand with mental issues, mental problems. Just like we don't have a say in the fact that we get blue eyes, we don't have a say in our genes. And again, we need to be able to talk about this and break the taboo, and for parents to be aware that when there is a genetic predisposition, that their children know about it, and that parents supervise the children to be aware, what is my child doing, who is he with, what kind of activities are they doing, are they making healthy decisions, so that if problems start, it's not, it doesn't catch the parent off guard.
And what I'm hearing out of all of this, the takeaway for our parents and our students: communicate, 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 reach out. And I'd like to thank our panelists who came on the show today, as well as the studio audience who came out and participated in the conversation. I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Healthcare Initiative Foundation, as well as Montgomery County Media, for hosting this event. If you need help, do not hesitate to reach out to these people who want to see you succeed. feel free to call the crisis text line, or text the crisis text line, connect to 741-741. We also have BeTheOne.org. Montgomery County's public awareness campaign reminds us that we can be the one to help. Also, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, 1-800-273-8255, 1-800-273-TALK. You can also call the Montgomery County Crisis Center at 240-777-4000.